Good morning, everybody. So today we're going to talk a little bit about watercolor. In case you missed the watercolor lesson in class, you'll be able to look at this, watch this, and maybe get a little sense of where watercolor comes from. And then on your watercolor canvas page, there will be several videos that I'd like you to watch. I'm not going to record those within this recording, but we'll talk just briefly. To get to your watercolor page, you're going to go to your Canvas class. You will then go to the table of contents over here, and you will go to watercolor. We'll click on that. And you will see here's all of the notes that I gave, as well as some videos that you need to watch. So just to start out, I'll tell you that obviously, watercolor is a type of painting that is done on paper, and it involves a pigment being some sort of color, a color, either a mineral or some sort of manufactured color, mixed with a binding agent, meaning like something to hold it together, and then you add water to it, and there you go, voila. If you're unsure about the whole concept of a pigment and a binding agent, think about a crayon. Okay, it's another form of a pigment with the color, and the binding agent in that case would be wax. They put them together, boom, you got a crayon. So same idea with watercolor. It's just something that will dissolve in water. Watercolor is a very old medium. It's probably as old as mankind itself. You can look back at cave paintings back 17,000 years ago, some of them. And those are basically watercolor when you think about it. The cavemen, they took mud or they took some sort of mineral that they ground up and they added it to water, and then either using their hand or maybe the brush might have been a tail of an animal that they would then use that to put it up on the wall. And you can see here's a good example of cave paintings right here. So that's basically watercolor, right? The Egyptians did much the same thing, much later than that, but here you have an example. They would mix a pigment, some sort of mineral that they ground up, and they would add it to water, and then they would put that directly onto wet plaster oftentimes, which is why a lot of it has survived. So watercolor has been a medium that has been used for thousands of years. The fact of the matter, though, is the main type of painting that you think about was probably not watercolor up until about 18, late 1800s probably. And that's because paper was not very easy to get. The cavemen were painting on cave walls, the Egyptians were painting on plaster, but then, later, uh, paints like oil paints became really popular because you could paint them on canvas and they would last for a long time. Watercolor didn't last very well if you just painted it on, say, like the Egyptians had papyrus, which was paper, sort of a paper formed from reeds that were sort of woven together. But it wasn't a very permanent type of painting unless you did like what they did where you paint right into wet plaster. But that wasn't very easy to transport. That had to be sort of part of a building. So paper is really what was best to paint on. They used to paint on silk in Asia, which is cool. But again, silk is hard to come by. And paper was very hard to come by for a long time until they figured out a way to manufacture it. And that was part of the Industrial Revolution. Well, when that happened, paper became, pretty readily available. So then people were able to sort of take that up as a very common recreational type of painting. One of the most, I guess, useful uses of watercolor turned out to be people who wanted to paint sort of in the moment, get right out into nature, and really discover something about nature. One of the most famous of those was John James Audubon, and he painted birds in the wild all over the world. And he was able to bring bird species to light that people had never heard of. Things like you might see here the puffin. We're pretty common. We're pretty familiar with the puffin, but those were unheard of in Arizona, say, or New York City, or places that don't have those kinds of birds. They would have thought those were something out of a storybook. So because he was able to go into the wild and paint from life oftentimes and paint right in the moment, watercolor was really the medium for that. Okay, so that's a little history of watercolor for you. Now, there's going to be several videos I'm going to ask you to watch that will show you how to use watercolor. This one is the first one. And this one is going to teach you how to paint a watercolor sphere. I want you to do one of those. And you can get the watercolor paper from me, or if you just are out shopping, you can go buy it. But with this video, I really want you to watch how little paint you actually need with the water. It's okay to start out light and then build up your colors and your shadows and things like that. When you watch her paint that sphere, the first thing she paints is barely any paint at all, but she just keeps adding a little bit more, and that's really the trick with watercolor. You don't need as much paint as you think you do. Watercolor is a medium that is transparent, so you start with your lightest things first, and then you build up to your darkest things. The next thing I want you to watch is this video here about how to paint a watercolor leaf. You'll need to get a fall leaf and paint that. That is one of your assignments. The watercolor leaf assignment, people usually end up with a painting that is better than they think. Now, there's lots of techniques to watch when he does this, but what I really want you to pay attention to is that he does not paint an outline of his leaf to start with. And that's really important. When you paint an outline around something in acrylic paint or in crayon or colored pencil, you can draw an outline and then fill it in. I always think about the example of mountains because I see that a lot. You draw the mountains, then you fill them in with your color. But with watercolor, if you draw an outline of those mountains first and then go fill them in with color, you're never going to get rid of that line, because every time you add more paint, it just adds another layer of darkness. So that first line that you drew just keeps getting darker, and you don't ever get rid of it. So when you watch this guy paint his leaf, you'll see he starts in an area, he sort of fills in a shape, and then he just keeps going down with that shape. He calls it like starting a puddle and moving that puddle down. So some of that may seem, alien to you. It's not really the way we draw usually, but I want you to keep that in mind. Then you're going to watch these two videos. These are really just sort of instructional videos for how to do certain techniques. But your final watercolor assignment is to do a watercolor painting of your choice. So it can be a landscape. A lot of times people choose landscapes to do. That's fine. Both of these videos will give you some ideas about how to paint clouds or how to paint like mountains and trees. One thing I always tell people watching these videos, remember the people on the videos have done these techniques over and over and over again, so they're very practiced at it. They make it look really easy, but watercolor it's a challenging medium. So don't be afraid to make a mistake, and don't let one or two mistakes, bog you down. It happens to everybody. It's okay. But just be willing to keep trying it and keep practicing, and you'll get better. After you paint your leaf, your sphere, which was the first thing, and your watercolor landscape, or whatever it is you want to, still life, or whatever you want to paint, there are some extra credit opportunities. You may paint 4 small, and I use half sheets for this. This size right here, This is just a little half sheet. The 4 extra credit paintings you can do for 15 points each, which can equal out to be almost a full project grade. So it's really a good place to pile on some extra points. You can paint an animal, which, I mean, that's obvious. You can paint an object. So, set something up on your table, your water bottle, your phone, an apple, something like that. You can paint a close-up, which is basically, you might think about, well, I said there, like, you can zoom in on a part of like a push pin, or maybe a pencil eraser, or just some close-up part of some larger object. Or you may do something fantasy or imaginative. This would be like a cartoon, or a dragon or a spaceship or something like that. The one place people get confused is with the animal. I want it to be something that looks relatively realistic. With the fantasy or imagine, that's where you can do like a cartoon cat or something like that. Those, like I said, are worth 15 points each, up to 15 points each. Do your best work and have fun with those. And if you have any questions about watercolor in general, feel free to get a hold of me, ask me a question. I'll help you with anything you need. There are also tons and tons and tons of videos that you can find online, resources. When you are all done, there is an online quiz to take for the leaf. And in that leaf quiz, it asks you about your sphere. And then there is one to take for, I call it landscape. Again, it doesn't have to be a landscape. It can be something else. It can be similar to the drawing from a photograph that you did at the last part of the drawing assignment. All right, so that was kind of a long one, but that was a watercolor in a nutshell. Have fun. Make sure you do your quizzes and get those done. All right. Those will not be due until next quarter, by the way, if you are watching this before the 15th of October. Okay. All right. See you soon.